In July 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Nasser nationalised the Suez Canal, a key strategic waterway that connected the Mediterranean with the Red Sea. For Britain, and to a lesser extent France, the nationalisation of the canal posed a series of problems that, in the view of British Prime Minister Anthony Eden, could not go unnoticed. The primary concern was that President Nasser could close the canal at any given time, thus severing 2/3 of Britain's national oil imports and cutting its links with its Eastern Empire, such as Malaya and Australia. In the eyes of Anthony Eden, military intervention was required to prevent such eventualities, and at the start of August 1956 he joined with France to overthrow the Egyptian government, effectively starting an episode in history now known as the Suez Crisis. Beginning on the 10th of August 1956, the first invasion plans were drafted, which focused on an Anglo-French force seizing the port of Alexandria, prior to an advance southwards to secure the Egyptian capital city of Cairo. However, under the guidance of British General Charles Keightley, who had been put in overall command of the invasion, these plans were changed at the end of the month. Keightley's plan, codenamed Operation Musketeer Revise, centred on securing the mouth of the Suez Canal itself, with a preparatory British and French air effort to establish aerial superiority across northern Egypt, before a combined air and seaborne assault took place against Port Said. The ground forces allotted to this task included the 3rd Commander Brigade with the 6th Royal Tank Regiment attached, both of which were located in Malta, the 3rd Infantry Division in Britain, the 10th Armoured Division in Libya, the 16th Parachute Brigade in Cyprus, the French 7th Armoured Division in Algeria, and the French 10th Parachute Division, also deployed in Cyprus. Keightley's revised invasion plans were not only more realistic and sustainable for both the British and French militaries, but the new landing point of Port Said allowed for a third player in the invasion: Israel. Israeli involvement in the campaign had been repeatedly pushed through by the French government, but Britain, worried that allying with Israel would alienate her Middle Eastern partners, objected to any Israeli support. However, as the preparations for Operation Musketeer became more sophisticated, Prime Minister Eden accepted Israeli involvement, and on the 22nd of October 1956, the three nations held a joint meeting in the French town of Sèvres. Here they finalised the invasion plans and agreed that Israel would open the conflict with an advance into Sinai in northeastern Egypt. Britain and France would then step in and act as the mediators in the war, demanding that both sides withdraw from and establish a neutral zone around the Suez Canal, or risk foreign military intervention. Israel, being part of the coalition, would accept the ultimatum, but it is anticipated that Egypt would not, thus giving Britain and France the necessary justification they needed to overthrow President Nasser and launch Operation Musketeer. At 3 in the afternoon on the 29th of October 1956, the Israeli Air Force began bombing Egyptian military targets to pave the way for the Israeli ground advance an hour later. 2 days later, on the 31st of October, General Charles Keightley was informed that Egypt had rejected the ultimatum, and that Operation Musketeer was a go. At Malta, the Royal Marines of the 3rd Commander Brigade, with the attached Centurion tanks of the 6th Royal Tank Regiment, boarded their respective troop ships and set off for the landing beaches at Port Said. Meanwhile, British and French aircraft bombed and targeted Egyptian military positions as part of the aerial superiority phase of Musketeer, an aerial campaign that lasted until the 5th of November. On that day, the paratroopers of the 3rd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, were ordered to board their transport aircraft to conduct an airborne assault against the El Gamal airfield. At 15 minutes past 5 on the morning of the 5th of November, the first transport planes appeared over the drop zone. Within 10 minutes, the 3rd Battalion was on the ground and moving on its objectives. A Company advanced and assaulted the airfield's control tower, prior to securing a pillbox on the western end of the runway. Meanwhile, C Company organised and established itself in the airfield's centre, whilst B Company landed on the eastern end. Within 30 minutes of landing, the El Gamal airfield had been secured, and the battalion was moving east towards Port Said. Several minutes after the 3rd Battalion began dropping, their French counterparts in the 2nd Colonial Parachute Regiment landed to the south of Port Said. Within 5 minutes, the French battalion was on the ground and moving to secure its objectives, which included the town's waterworks and the Raswood bridges. By 9 AM, the French battalion had overcome what resistance there was and secured its objectives. Back with the 3rd Battalion, Egyptian opposition to its advance on Port Said was growing with intensity, particularly when B Company assaulted the town's sewage works, where enemy snipers held the company at bay for over an hour. When their position was eventually in British hands, C Company then took over the advance with the object of securing a nearby cemetery. Opposition again proved heavy, with the Egyptian troops using 4 Soviet-made Su-100 tank destroyers to fire onto the advancing British paratroopers. Eventually, the cemetery was secured after the Egyptian defenders had been dislodged by an airstrike. The battalion continued its eastward push until a 3rd strong point was reached, a Coast Guard barracks, which had been heavily reinforced by the Egyptian forces and held up the British advance for the remainder of the day. By afternoon on the 5th of November, ammunition within the 3rd Battalion was reaching critical levels, and the 16th Parachute Brigade commanding officer, Brigadier Mervyn Butler, decided to withdraw it back to the area of the sewage works until morning the next day. The 6th of November dawned with Port Said engulfed in flames and smoke, as a British and French naval armada appeared off its coastline. Embedded into the fleet were the men of No. 40 and No. 42 Royal Marine Commandos of the 3rd Commander Brigade, whose task it was to launch a seaborne assault against the town. First to land were the men of No. 40 Commando, who made landfall at their designated beach at exactly 7 o'clock. 10 minutes later, No. 42 Commando touched down, and both battalions moved off under sporadic enemy fire to their inland objectives. Behind them, the Centurion tanks of C Squadron, 6th Royal Tank Regiment, disembarked onto the beach. On the left, No. 42 quickly established itself on the coastal road before encountering stiff Egyptian resistance in and around the government square. After a series of attacks, all of which were repulsed, the Marines called in an airstrike which neutralised the enemy position. The battalion, with armoured support provided by a handful of Centurion tanks, then re-embarked into their buffaloes and moved off through Port Said with utmost speed. Racing down what is now called Al Shahada, No. 42 broke through the Egyptian front line and within a few hours had established themselves on the outskirts of Port Said. Disembarking from their vehicles, the Marines set up positions within the town's gasworks and golf courses, prior to elements probing further south where contact was established with the French paratroopers of the 2nd Colonial Parachute Regiment at midday on the 6th of November. On their right, No. 40 Commando encountered similar success, making rapid advances onto the coastal road and into the suburbs of Port Said, where they secured the area of the Ferdinand de Lesseps monument. However, the push inland by No. 40 began to bog down as Egyptian strongpoints held out against all that was thrown at them, particularly around a position known as Navy House. Here, fighting raged all throughout the day as the Marines, with their supporting Centurion tanks, fought to dislodge the enemy. All attempts, though, proved to be in vain, and eventually in the late afternoon, an airstrike was requested to clear the way for a ground assault by No. 40, which successfully overran the strongpoint afterwards. Despite the setbacks it encountered in overcoming a series of well-sighted Egyptian positions, No. 40 Commando was successful in securing the northern end of the town's harbour facilities, which, alongside the landing beaches, enabled further reinforcements to pour ashore, including A and B squadrons of the 6th Royal Tank Regiment. Following up behind No. 40 and No. 42 were the Marines of No. 45 Commando, who were inserted into the beachhead through the use of helicopters. No. 45's landing zone was near to the coastal road, and once assembled, the troops moved into the town centre where they had the task of clearing the area between No. 40 and No. 42 Commandos. As the British landings took place against Port Said, a simultaneous seaborne assault by French troops took place against neighbouring Port Fuad, which had been secured several hours earlier by elements of the French 2nd Colonial Parachute Regiment, the same unit that had dropped to the south of Port Said. Elsewhere, on the extreme left flank of the invasion, the 3rd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, who had remained in place around the sewage works during the night, began moving off again at 10 minutes past 5 on the morning of the 6th of November. C Company moved off first, re-securing the cemetery, before it led an attack on the Coast Guard barracks, which was also cleared by 8 o'clock in the morning. But like the day before, the battalion was unable to break into central Port Said, thanks in part to the stout resistance put up by the well-placed Egyptian strongpoints, but also due to lone Egyptian snipers tasked with delaying the British advance. The situation for the paratroopers remained like this until the morning of the 7th of November, when contact was finally made with Royal Marines of No. 45 Commando. As British troops stormed ashore in Egypt, 2,000 miles away in London, Prime Minister Anthony Eden was fighting his own political battles, as he came under considerable pressure from the United Nations, and in particular America, to withdraw from Egypt. Eventually, caving to this pressure, Eden ordered operations to end in the afternoon of the 6th of November, with a ceasefire to take effect from 2 a.m. on the 7th of November. However, British and French commanders on the ground in Egypt were not informed of the ceasefire and continued offensive operations. In the afternoon of the 6th of November, the 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, disembarked at Port Said. At that same time, A Squadron of the 6th Royal Tank Regiment reached the Raswa Bridges and, alongside elements of the French 2nd Colonial Parachute Regiment, advanced south to expand the beachhead. Moving south for 15 miles, the force established lager at El Tina, where A Squadron awaited the arrival of the British 2nd Parachute Regiment. The 2nd Battalion reached El Tina at approximately 11 o'clock in the evening of the 6th of November, where they received orders to mount onto the Centurion tanks and press on through the night to secure the town of El Kantara in the early hours of the 7th of November. However, at 2 a.m. the armoured paratrooper force was ordered to halt at El Cap due to the enforcement of the ceasefire, marking the end of Operation Musketeer.